Hey there folks, it's Scott once again, coming back to you with another movie review, yet again. Like I promised, it's going to be of the 2019 American-Canadian horror film, The Prodigy. I saw this on the 12th of this month, and I got the ticket right here still to prove that, so there you go. And the film's directed by Nicholas McCarthy, produced by Tara Farney, Trip Vinson. The film was written by Jeff Bueller, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And the film stars Taylor. I keep getting confused. I'm sorry. Taylor Schilling is her name. Newcomer Jackson Robert Scott. Colm Feore. Let me look and make sure. Peter Mooney and Paul Fauteux. It's kind of a French sounding name because he's an actor from Canada. So there you go. And so overall, from what I've seen in this film, I thought it was a decent film. Definitely a nice little film for Orion, who's recently been on a comeback trail, because the last time they really have produced a feature film, I guess that was released theatrically, was probably back in '97 with Yuli's Gold, apparently. And that was probably more of an independent film, so it's good to see that Orion's making a comeback. They're now part of the MGM company that I believe they started reviving the company back in either 2016 or 2017. It was one of those 2 years, so they started off kind of smaller on the TV scale, and then eventually they decided to give it the movie studio boost, I guess. And I think, yeah, if I'm not mistaken, I think they're producing the upcoming, or at least in part with the Child's Play remake that's due out this year. But yeah, and getting to the film, it has a pretty chilling opening, and it's very effective and creepy as well. Basically, we see this woman running around, and we find out that one of her hands are cut off, and it's done by this really deranged serial killer named Edward Skarka, who's played by that Paul guy that I mentioned earlier. And basically, he eventually gets caught, or they find out where he lives, basically due to this woman. And while this is going on, apparently these new parents, this married couple, Sarah and John, are on the verge of giving birth. It's weird how they say Sarah and John's like they're both giving birth, but really specifically Sarah's giving birth, and her husband John's helping out, delivering her to the hospital. And while this is going on, they track down Edward, gun him down. He's actually all naked. He actually has a weapon in his hand, and that's why the police shoot him down. And then, of course, Miles is born thereafter. And do we see during the early years? This film, I forgot to mention, takes place on August of 2010, August 22nd specifically. And we see at 5 years old, he's starting to exhibit some, very high intelligence functions, like he's wisdom, intelligence. He starts to already excel over the normal behavior of kids. And he even begins to speak pretty fluently even before he's a toddler. We also notice that his eyes are different colors. I believe the specific term is heterochromia. But like I said, when we get to age 5, when her and the psychologist are discussing something, we see that a spire is in Miles' hands, and he actually crushes it, just to show how very creepy and effectiveness how it is. Then when he is 8 in 2018. They definitely notice, the parents both notice that some changes in him, like he's able to like a certain spice in his food or whatnot. And then one day he plays a prank on his babysitter, and I think he unscrews the light bulb and leaves it all crushed down there, and the babysitter hears something, checks the basement, and she steps on it, and it injures her. Of course, Miles claims that he doesn't remember that, but that's definitely not true. Then days later at school, apparently this classmate, I guess is giving him a hard time, and then Miles goes in the janitor's closet and retrieves a wrench and smacks the kid with it. I can't remember specifically where he smacked him with, but he basically attacks him with a wrench, pretty much. And so eventually Sarah decides to bring him to a psychologist named Elaine, and then to kind of, figure out what's going on with Miles and what he's going through. And then later at night, apparently, when Miles is, supposedly asleep, Sarah notices that he's whispering something at night, and Sarah decides to record that. And eventually she turns the tape over to Elaine to see what it represents, if it's just gibberish. And then Elaine, of course, turns it into to Arthur Jacobson, played by Colm Feore as well. And he's an expert on, rebirth and reincarnation, which is where the film kind of focuses on, because it's not really about possession. It's more like, reincarnation done in a more twisted way, which is what I found very interesting about the film. And so eventually, Arthur is able to decipher what the language is. It's actually Hungarian, but the words are pretty graphic and vulgar. It ends up translating to, I'll cut your eyes out and watch you die, whore. And so Arthur tries to convince the mother, that Sarah specifically, that, Miles might be, not exactly possessed, but, someone's reincarnation spirit's inside Miles, but she's not willing to buy it. However, there's several other things that eventually gets her to go to him, such as the family dog decides to go missing, and John becomes infuriated when he learns that Miles has been really recording stuff in the couple's bedroom with the baby monitor, and even taunts John in the car about being a bad father like his father was before him, or something like that, while they were driving out. And eventually, because of this, John needs a break and decides to go live with his brother while Sarah stays with Miles. And then eventually, in the middle of the night, all these flies keep buzzing in and whatnot. And eventually, Sarah and Miles go down to the, I believe, the basement, and Sarah finds the dismembered dog, pretty much gut to shit, bloody, and that's probably where all the flies are flying to, more than likely. And Miles claims that Miles, of course, apologizes and explains that someone's invading his dreams every night and that he has to make room. And that eventually, Sarah decides to bring him to Arthur Jacobson to see if he can use this form of hypnotism to kind of, get to know what the spirit is and what it wants, pretty much. Because earlier Arthur and Elaine were showing Sarah, spirits being reincarnated. Like one was an old World War II pilot, and he needed to, get some kind of certain plane off the ground, and eventually it did that, and the spirit left, and the child, grew up normally. So now here, Arthur decides he wants to get to know what this dark spirits and wants and needs, and the hypnotism is actually kind of successful. He gets to know who the person really is, and of course we later learn it's actually Edward Skarka. His parents were Hungarian, and his parents were Hungarian immigrants, and that he's definitely off to wanting to finish something. But unfortunately, the session goes quickly awry, where he decides he's going to threaten Arthur by saying that he being drugged and being molested by him by the use of his pubic hair specifically, which is very chilling and very effective performance by Jackson Robert Scott. So yeah, and unfortunately, Arthur decides to, give him back to Sarah, claiming that it was not successful. But later that night, Arthur does call. Well, before that, Arthur finds some writing that Miles actually scratched on there, Skarka, and of course later Arthur calls Sarah to explain that he believes that Edward is pretty much vying for Miles's body and wants to probably get to someone. We later find out that he wants to get to pretty much his last victim that escaped, and probably that would set Miles free if that's the case. And because of that, John and Sarah kind of learn about this. They decide they will have him incarcerated at some point, and Miles is with his dad in the vehicle, but unfortunately, more likely the Edward persona comes out and stabs him. Stabs John en route to the facility and causes him to crash, and as a result, John's not dead, just in a coma, and is going to be out for a good while. And then, of course, when Sarah returns home, she eventually goes into Miles' room and covers these cache of newspaper clippings and articles about Edward's crimes, and as well as a book that was written by his victim that escaped that led the authorities to him. And Margaret St. James is the character's name. And so Sarah decides it's going to be time for her to maybe go down there and maybe unfortunately do a dark deed where maybe if Edward kills this last victim, Margaret, maybe this will set him free. Sarah decides to go down there, claim that she's like a victim of abuse of some kind, or battered woman, as it says in the Wikipedia, who was touched by Margaret's book, and and that persuades Margaret to allow her in. And then of course, Sarah's having trouble whether or not to go through it, and she attempts to by drawing a gun on her, but she feels like she cannot do it. However, Miles has entered the house and brutally stabs Margaret and even disemboweling her, pretty much. Pretty gruesome scene right there. And then he eventually leaves, and of course Margaret dies from her wounds, and Sarah follows Miles to this to the adjacent orchid out there to console him. However, spoilers. If you haven't watched the film, go turn away and go watch the film. If you want to continue watching, go ahead. But you've been warned. So basically, you think, well, if he does this, killer spirit will go out and whatnot, and Miles will have a normal childhood when he does the deed and whatnot. Unfortunately, it's revealed that that's not the case. Apparently, Edward had fully taken over his body already at this point. He has actually done this since the night, I never mentioned this, but the night that Miles went into Sarah's room whenever John left, where he says, "Will you promise to love me no matter what?" That's when apparently Miles was gone for good, and now Edward has fully taken over. And this is horrifying to her, and she actually draws a gun and attempts to kill him, but apparently a farmer nearby draws a shotgun, guns her down, and she dies from her wounds. And eventually, sometime later, Miles is reunited is actually at a temporary foster home care until his dad makes a full recovery. And then we see that then when Miles stares into the mirror, basically there is the image of the adult Edward right back at him, and that's how it ends. And getting to the pros and cons, I guess the pros is that there were some pacing issues, I guess you can say, and it was a little boring at times. And I guess you can say mainly the problem I had was the ending was a bit of a downbeat ending, a bit of a downer, and kind of dark and depressing. Well, maybe not depressing, but it's dark and a downbeat. So that's mainly the problem I had, I guess, mainly because and the thing was, I think the film wasn't sure if it was going to go for that dark ending. It was one of those things where maybe they will go for it, maybe they won't, or they weren't so sure about the filmmakers. But yeah, and and there was a few scenes that were kind of off with the child, and there was something else, like maybe whenever the dad arrived injured and had a stab wound, and you would think why wouldn't the hospital authorities want to put him in a more secure area or ask him questions like how did he get that stab wound? Like, wouldn't you want to put if the child confessed, when you want to have him under lock and keep or something? So I guess by then, since it's revealed that Edward had taken over fully, maybe he convinced them that there was an accident or maybe something happened. I don't know. They'll like you said, they'll believe an innocent child. So yeah. But anywho's, I guess you can say overall, I'd say pacing issues. It was a little boring at times when Sarah does her investigation on it. And then, of course, the ending was a bit of a darker and downbeat ending, which I was hoping that maybe, the reincarnated spirit of Edward would go away, but that's not the case. And it's kind of a sequel bait ending in a sense, because that's what it's probably setting itself up for a sequel. I think so far the film has done okay, didn't take much to make, but I don't know. So that's probably that's a bit of the downer right there, is that unfortunately the bad guy wins, so yeah. But the pros, I think the film's very well shot, and the performances, I think Taylor Schilling gives a very natural performance as the mother, whether she's confused or whether or not she wants to help her son or turn her over to the authorities. She's determined to see that Miles gets better and whatnot, and is determined to save her son. You see that she's willing to go through having to do a dark deed so that way the spirit can leave and that maybe Miles can have a normal life. She does a good job in that role. And the newcomer Jackson Robert Scott, for the most part, overall, he does a pretty good. Well, not pretty good, but he does a good job. He does some chilling scenes, even when he's when he's more of the Edward personality. He's very effective, and especially in the very end when it's revealed that Edward has fully taken control of the body and knew what it was going for, and he knew what the mother was trying to do and whatnot. He gave a very chilling performance, especially when he was especially in the doctor scene, the psychology, where he basically threatened the doctor, and man, he's very convincing in that role. I can definitely see some roles for that actor lining up in the future if he chooses to pursue that type of career. And Colm Feore, for the scene he's in, he's pretty solid. I especially liked how he handled that hypnotizing scene. He's a very solid, underrated actor. In fact, I recently watched a film with him that was made 15 years ago where he's a serial killer in this movie called Highwayman, but I'll get to that when I do the film review. He's played his fair share of villains. Like, I know he was the villain in The Chronicles of Riddick. He was a villain in Thor, actually. He was the Frost King, pretty much, in that film. So yeah. And I like the fact that it deals with reincarnation. I like it. I like the fact that it wasn't just, a possession movie or something along that nature, or a supernatural type of film. It is kind of a supernatural film in a sense, but it's more about reincarnation and how we get to learn, about spirits, getting into bodies somehow and wanting to finish what they started. Like I mentioned earlier about a World War II fighter pilot got inside a kid, and he's basically wanting to construct this plane or fly something, and eventually his spirit, goes peacefully, and the kid starts to have a normal childhood. And there's another example of this, but I can't remember. It's been a while since I've seen it. But I like how it touched on that aspect. Like, it's not a possession film. It touches on what reincarnation can do. Like, maybe the spirits are wanting to finish something. Like, someone wanted to maybe change the world, and they didn't get a chance to do that when they died or something. So I thought that was interesting for this film. Though this is a more twisted version because it involves a serial killer. And it's too bad that the Edward spirit never left Miles's body, because now apparently it's taken over, and either Miles is still in there or not, or he can be saved, or I don't know. So overall, I'd say sorry about that. I'm trying to think on this one here. I think overall, the performances and the reincarnation storyline and the very effective music and the cinematography, it's pretty solid. I liked it. It's what made the film decent for me, despite the fact that it has its flaws, because it's definitely not a perfect film. And overall, I definitely recommend it, and I can see why it's having somewhat of a modest success, because so far I think the film only cost $6 million to make. So far, I believe it's only made about $15.7 million, but that's probably counting for the worldwide gross. So let's see how much it's made so far. And get it up here. Sorry, I'm looking at my computer, as you've noticed. Let's get it up here. Come on. No, it's yesterday. That was yesterday. Sorry, it's a Foreigner song that I'm thinking of, so yeah, there you go. There we go, Box Office Mojo. Come on. Actuals. Okay, in the States alone, it's made about $13.5 million, so it's made a profit. It's not a huge success, but I think there might be a chance for a sequel. And hopefully that sequel doesn't get a downbeat ending as well. But then again, it is horror, so not everything's going to be ending that well. So overall, if it's still playing, I'd recommend it. I thought it was a decent flick, and it's definitely worth a first look. And it's great to see Orion getting back in the swing of things. I definitely think there's a good, bright future for the actor that played Miles, and when he was the Edward personality. So yeah. Overall, decent film. Give it a watch. If not, if you don't want to see it in theaters, I guess wait for Redbox, or it's funny how you don't even get Blockbuster or any of those video rental stores anymore. So Redbox, Netflix, or even rent it on YouTube. So there you go. But that's going to do it for me. I don't know which movie review that I'm going to do next. Either I'm going to do Cold Pursuit or some of the requests that I've been meaning to get to, and maybe I'll do that instead. But who knows? I want to probably get these 3 films. The next film I might do is maybe Cold Pursuit with Liam Neeson. That was a decent flick. But it has issues, and just like this film, it definitely had its issues. It's not perfect, but overall, solid film. Alright folks, I will see you in another video. Later.